been a lurker here for a long time, reading all of your creepy experiences, and telling myself that none of that could happen to me. I've always been pretty skeptical, the kind of person who rationalizes things away. But then, something happened to me a few years ago that I still haven't been able to explain, and it's stuck with me ever since. So, here I am, finally ready to share. This story takes place about 6 years ago. At the time, I was 26 and working a job that required a lot of travel. I was doing consulting for small businesses in rural areas, and part of that job was spending time in some seriously remote places. I'm talking one-road towns with maybe a gas station, a diner, and not much else. So, one weekend, my company sends me to this tiny town in upstate New York, like middle of nowhere upstate, where you've got nothing but farmland and trees for miles. I was supposed to meet with a client early Monday morning, but since I had to drive up from the city, I decided to leave on Saturday to give myself some time to settle in and explore. I've always been a sucker for that small town, peaceful vibe, so I wasn't too upset about having some extra time. Now, the thing about these small towns is that the hotel options are pretty limited, if they exist at all. My company usually sets me up with an Airbnb or whatever local inn they can find, but in this case, the closest thing to a hotel was a bed and breakfast located about 20 minutes outside of town. The listing online looked nice enough, old rustic farmhouse vibes. I figured it'd be quiet and peaceful, which sounded perfect after a long drive. I arrived late Saturday afternoon, just as the sun was starting to set. The drive had been long but kind of beautiful, passing through all these rolling hills and farmland. But the closer I got to the B&B, the more isolated everything felt. Like the last 10 miles were on this narrow dirt road, and I didn't pass a single car the entire way. It was a little eerie, but I wasn't too worried yet. After all, I was used to these remote places. When I finally pulled up to the house, I got out of my car and just stood there for a minute, taking it all in. The farmhouse looked even older in person. It was this big 2-story house, probably built in the late 1800s or early 1900s. The paint was peeling in places, and the windows were small and kind of grimy, but overall it didn't seem too bad. It had that old-timey charm, you know? The kind you'd expect from a place like this. I grabbed my bag and headed up the porch steps to the front door. The owner, an older woman named Diane, greeted me with a smile and showed me around. She was nice enough, if a little distant. She gave me the whole spiel about breakfast times and how to work the old radiator in my room if it got cold at night. I could tell right away that this place had a lot of history. The floors creaked with every step, and there were these old oil paintings hanging in the hallway that looked like they belonged in a museum. My room was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway. The door to the room was one of those heavy wooden ones with a brass knob that looked like it hadn't been changed in over a century. Inside, the room was small but cozy. There was an antique 4-poster bed with a quilt on it, a dresser with a mirror, and a small window that looked out over the fields behind the house. It was simple, but I liked it. The first night was uneventful. I was exhausted from the drive, so after unpacking a few things, I climbed into bed and fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning I woke up early, grabbed some breakfast downstairs, and decided to spend the day exploring the area. Diane had mentioned a few hiking trails nearby, so I spent most of the day outside, just enjoying the fresh air and the peace and quiet. By the time I got back to the house that evening, it was already dark. I was tired from the hiking, so I decided to take a quick shower and then settle in with a book. The bathroom was at the end of the hall across from my room, and as I was walking back to my room afterward, I noticed something strange. The door to the room next to mine, which had been closed and locked when I arrived, was now slightly ajar. I hadn't seen anyone else staying at the house, and Diane hadn't mentioned any other guests. I figured maybe she had been cleaning or airing it out, so I didn't think much of it and went back to my room. I tried to relax and read, but something about the house felt different that night. I couldn't shake this weird feeling of being watched, like there was someone standing just outside my door. Every now and then, I'd hear a soft creak in the hallway, like footsteps. But when I opened the door to check, there was never anyone there. At around midnight, I decided to call it a night and try to get some sleep. I turned off the light and lay there for a while, just listening to the sounds of the old house settling. At first, it was just the usual creaks and groans of an old building. But after a few minutes, I started to hear something else. It was faint at first, but it sounded like whispering. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it was definitely a voice. My first thought was that maybe Diane had left a radio on downstairs or something, but the sound wasn't coming from below me. It was coming from the room next to mine. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to race. The door to the other room was still slightly open, and the light from the hallway cast a dim glow into the dark room. I strained to hear more clearly, but the whispering had stopped. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. Then, just as I was about to lie back down, the door to the other room slowly creaked open a little more. I froze, my eyes locked on the door. There was no way anyone else could be in that room. I hadn't heard any footsteps, and I knew for a fact that no one else was staying at the house. But as I stared at the door, I swore I could see a shadow moving in the darkness. For a moment, I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The old house, the creepy atmosphere, it was all getting to me. But then, I heard the whispering again, louder this time. Come closer. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to get out of bed, to run downstairs and tell Diane, but I was too scared to move. The whispering continued, but now it was accompanied by a soft, shuffling sound, like someone was moving around in the other room. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was just tired and imagining things, but then the door to my room started to slowly open. I shot up in bed, my body trembling. The door opened just enough for me to see out into the hallway, but there was no one there. The whispering had stopped, and the house was completely silent. For what felt like hours, I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I worked up the courage to get out of bed and close the door. I locked it this time, even though I knew that wouldn't make a difference if whatever was out there wanted to come in. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat in bed, listening, waiting. But nothing else happened. The next morning, I packed my bags and left before Diane even had a chance to make breakfast. I didn't bother telling her what had happened. I figured she wouldn't believe me anyway. To this day, I still don't know what I heard or saw that night. Part of me wants to believe it was just the house, an old building making weird noises. But deep down, I know it wasn't just that. Something was in that house with me, and it wanted me to come closer. I've stayed in plenty of creepy old places since then, but nothing has ever made me feel the way that farmhouse did. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm alone at night. And every time, I wonder what would have happened if I had listened to that whispering voice. Maybe it was nothing, but maybe I'm lucky I didn't find out.